The Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 Conversations Respond and Rebuild digital series is provided in partnership with Detroit Public Television and presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, with additional support from Accenture, Bank of America, Barton Mallow, Comerica Bank, Consumers Energy, Delta Dental, Dow, DTE Energy, Enbridge Energy, Ford Motor Company, Huntington Bank, ITC, KPMG, the Kresge Foundation, Kroger, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, PNC Bank, Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, the Skillman Foundation, and TCF Bank. And by these supporters. Support for Detroit Public TV's coverage is provided by DTE Energy Foundation and Masco.
We're for people, the pioneers, the underdogs, the players, and the slow and steadies. We're for people, for who they are and who they could become. Yes, we're a bank. And some say our business is all about money, but that's an old idea. Because look past the money and you'll see real human lives. We see it because we're for people. Huntington, welcome.
When it comes to Michigan's future, DTE is all in for you. So we're giving 2 million masks to frontline workers and 600,000 to small businesses as they reopen, helping over 500,000 families with meals and shelter, and leading a coalition to provide tablets and internet access to 51,000 school children so they can keep learning at home. DTE is all in for you. DTE.
Welcome to MPC20 Conversations, the Detroit Regional Chamber's Mackinac Policy Conference digital series. Like you, the Chamber pivoted in the face of COVID and adapted our signature event, Michigan Center Stage, to an electronic format. Thank you for your support of the Chamber and the Mackinac Policy Conference during these unprecedented times. None of this would be possible without our decade-long partnership with Detroit Public Television. During normal circumstances, DPTV has helped the Chamber lift the veil off the conference by broadcasting live on public television not just the proceedings of the Mackinac Policy Conference, but real-time interviews with the leaders and newsmakers that are regular fixtures on the island. Certainly one of those fixtures, and someone who is one of the most thought-provoking and popular sessions of the annual event, is Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan, who is the focus of today's MPC20 conversation. Mayor Duggan will be interviewed by one of our leading journalists, Roop of Detroit Fox 2 News, and welcomed by another good friend, Jerry Norcia, President and CEO of DTE Energy. Leadership is a special thing. As our political environment has soured over the last couple of decades, political posturing and partisanship has served as a poor substitute for leadership. With Mike Duggan, from his leadership emerging Detroit from municipal bankruptcy to his leadership today guiding Detroit from the nation's early COVID hotspot to one of the nation's largest cities with the lowest COVID infection rates, Mike Duggan has been a clear leader in Detroit. Now, this is not the year to joke about voting early and voting often, given the importance and challenges of voting in the COVID environment. But the Chamber is proud to have supported Mike Duggan early and often. And in fact, it's not a stretch to say that the Chamber was among Mike's earliest supporters. I also appreciate the leadership role DTE Energy has played in our community. I thank Jerry Norcia for joining Mayor Duggan today and for his efforts to make Detroit a better place for all of us, and for DTE's sponsorship of the MPC20 Conversation series. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, I'm Jerry Norcia, President and CEO of DTE Energy, and we are certainly pleased to sponsor this Mackinac Policy Conference 2020 session. And it is my great honor to introduce Mayor Mike Duggan. He is certainly a tenacious and persistent force for good for the citizens of Detroit. I can recall the first time I met the mayor, and it was right after his first win, his first election, where he met with us and called us into his office and said, look, one of my major projects has to be to replace the lighting system in Detroit, where almost 40 to 50% of the lights were non-functional before he took over. And he said, how fast can you get it done? And I said, well, how fast do you want it done, Mayor? He says, I want it done in record time. And we did do that. We replaced 88,000 lights in record time. It was one of the largest urban relighting programs in the country ever. And it was very interesting to work with Mike. He wanted daily reports, how many lights were being installed every day. And we moved that project along very well. The one thing that stuck in my mind was when we were talking about what type of lights to put up, we were saying, well, look, we can put up this one type of light that is much more economic and you can put more lights up. And he said, no, I want the best for the citizens of Detroit. And that's the type of advocate that he is for the citizens of Detroit. The second time I had interaction with him was when he landed the deal to bring the Chrysler plant to Detroit and bring 5,000 jobs to the city of Detroit. He worked 24/7 to get that done. He was tireless in getting that done. And I really, truly believe if not for him working that, we would have never brought those 5,000 jobs to the city of Detroit and the new FCE assembly plant. And lastly, during this pandemic, we worked together to get 50,000 tablets in the hands of school children. And he was a strong advocate there and a strong supporter. And so for all of that, Mr. Mayor, I thank you, and I'm pleased to call you my friend.
And Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan joins us now to, of course, kick off this very important conversation, Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 conversation. And Mr. Mayor, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Roop. And after listening to Jerry Norcia, I got to take him out on the campaign trail with me next year. We've done a lot of good things together.
You both have. And if you really think about partnerships, that's what this is all about. And if you watch and carefully watch what you did when you first came into office, it was not to do things alone and go at it alone, but really do it with people and with organizations, as wonderful organizations like DTE. As we honor those types of relationships, I want to kind of chat and get right into COVID-19. Something magical, in a sense, happened. People across the country were watching Detroit as it was one of the biggest hotspots that this country had seen. And quickly, things turned and took a turn for the better. When you think about partnerships, what was it? What's something that hasn't been reported yet about this particular change that you'd like people to know about? How did that happen that Detroit all of a sudden was able to rise above and stay out of the headlines when it came to COVID?
Well, we're staying vigilant because across the state, across the country, it's creeping back up now, and I am concerned about that. But the latest numbers show that the infection rate in Detroit is half of the infection rate in the suburbs. It's half of outstate Michigan, and it has been a community commitment. But you go back to those days in March and April where we had 1,000 people in just the Detroit hospitals, people on gurneys in the hallway, and we didn't know what we were being hit with, and they were building another 1,000 beds over at the TCF Center for the expected overflow, which the governor had to do. We just didn't know the way those numbers were going. It looked like we were going to need those 1,000 beds. And at the time, you remember, I said to the people in Detroit, how we respond, we're going to have a simple report card. What happens at the TCF Center? If those 1,000 beds get occupied, we will have failed. But I think if we do this right, we may never have to use more than 200. As it turned out, we never needed more than 16. I mean, it was amazing how fast we bent the curve. But partnerships, I don't even know where to start. The first thing is you had to get tested. And across the country where they did drive-through testing, they had people 6, 7, 8 hours in line. You had people running out of gas in line waiting for testing in other states. We said, we're not going to have that here. We're going to make sure people can call in on appointments. And you say, well, who in the world could handle thousands of phone calls and schedule appointments? Well, the folks over at Quicken had been obviously furloughed because of COVID. And so we talked to Dan Gilbert's folks, and literally within 72 hours, they had a massive appointment call system up and running. And then, we had to get test kits. And the only people who were able to do testing in the country was a lab called BioReference in New Jersey. There were only 50 tests a day being done for the entire state out of the state lab, and nobody else was licensed. And I couldn't get the CEO in New Jersey to call me back, but I called my friend Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan, who turned out he was BioReference's banker. And an hour later, we had a phone call, and all of a sudden, we're able to do 500, 1,000 tests a day. And we didn't have test kits. I mean, it was amazing. There were no swabs. The swabs in this country are largely made in Wuhan, China, if you can believe that. And so the huge problem with testing was you couldn't get swabs. Well, it turned out, I came out of a hospital system, and while there weren't any nasal swabs to be found, over at Hutzel Hospital, they have a whole lot of vaginal swabs. And so I didn't necessarily tell folks what we were using, but Dr. Roberto Romero for the NIH sent his people in the middle of the pandemic, worked the entire weekend, made up 1,000 test kits for us right off the first weekend. And so it turned out, we had one of the largest testing sites up and running in a matter of 4 or 5 days. And it was just after that, one partnership after another. But the biggest thing was the people of the city of Detroit came together. I mean, there is no doubt about the racial disparity in healthcare. And if an African American gets COVID, that individual is 2 to 3 times more likely to die from COVID than a Caucasian because of a lot of underlying health risks and the health gaps in this country. The people of this city didn't need to have that explained to them. I mean, the people here made a commitment to masks, to distancing, that, it's, if you just drive around, a whole lot more Detroiters today are out wearing masks than they are in the suburbs. And it's showing up in our lower infection rate.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I got to tell you, you said this early on. You said the credit also goes to the people. Great cooperation, great partnerships, but really the spirit of this city is one that's resilient and says we're going to fight anything that comes our way.
And Denise Fair, who had just started as our health director, it was promptly handed a pandemic. But you look at these spreader events now, it looks like 2 restaurants in Ann Arbor have had significant spreading. Of course, we had the issue out of the bar in East Lansing where hundreds of people were infected in one place. But Denise Fair and the police department have been very aggressive. If our bars and nightclubs are not following the protocols, we've shut them down. And 2 weeks ago, we shut down 3 nightclubs in the city. And they said to us, well, we can't control our customers. I said, fine, we'll control them for you. We pulled your license. They came back 48 hours later with a very good corrective action plan. And they understand that in Detroit, we're taking this seriously. The lives of our neighbors depend on this. And so we're going to continue to be diligent. But I think Denise Fair and the health department team also deserve enormous credit for what they've done.
Let's talk about these executive orders. Of course, we know what's happened with the governor, the Supreme Court, essentially striking down the emergency powers. At the same time, though, the Department of Health and Human Services with the state of Michigan has said, look, we'll put forth our own rules. The city of Detroit has done very much the same. In terms of binding power and the hand of the law, talk about these powers that the city has and what those mandates are for the people of the city of Detroit and the businesses.
Well, I mean, this is an area where I have a lot of legal background. And so it wasn't really that complicated, although it sounds confusing to the public. But the governor was acting on a 1945 World War II Emergency Powers Act. And the Supreme Court said that Emergency Powers Act didn't allow her to do what she's doing today. But there is a separate public health code. And it specifically provides that a health director at the state and a health director at the city can issue orders during an epidemic for the purpose of protection. And so what we said, and yesterday the Supreme Court struck down the governor's orders immediately, which I expected. So last week, what we did was we used the law that is clearly valid, the 1978 Public Health Code. We put the orders out by the city health director in the way that was legally strong, and we just avoided the whole Lansing mess. But Roop, we need to be serious about this. I look at these numbers every day, and they're trending up. Traditional flu season starts in October, peaks in January and February every year. People are indoors, it spreads quicker, the cold weather helps, etc. We don't know for sure whether COVID is going to track the flu, but there's a good chance that it will. And we're already seeing the numbers. I mean, we had more than 1,000 people in the hospitals back in March and April, but we had basically been down to about 50 per day across Detroit hospitals for the last 3 or 4 months. This week, we're not at 50. We're up to 75. Now, our hospitals can easily handle 75. But if we are on the traditional flu trajectory, by December or January, we could be back in crisis mode. And so at the very time the governor's orders are most needed, they are being put in jeopardy. This makes absolutely no sense. But I believe these numbers are going to continue to climb into the winter months, and that we are going to have to be more vigilant, not less vigilant.
Mayor Duggan, when you take a look at the pushback that you're hearing in Lansing from protesters and from others, of course, who are supportive of the Supreme Court striking down the governor's powers in this case, are you getting the same sentiment from the people of Detroit?
Not from the people of Detroit, but man, do I have a lot of hate mail from the people outstate. So I see what the governor has been dealing with. The people of the city have been completely united behind me from March to now as we have fought this thing. But when we put in the duplicate orders, I got hate mail from around the state on these militia types. And you start to see some of the anger that drove this insane kidnapping plan. But from Detroiters, it's just been complete support.
I want to get to that civility point here. Here we are approaching Election Day in a matter of weeks. When you take a look at where we are, both as a region and in this country, leadership matters. I'd like you to be able to speak out to people who may not like the way things are going right now, may not agree with this governor, perhaps not with you, but should understand that civility and decency is a part of the bedrock of our democracy.
Well, if you think about what I did from the time I became mayor, I mean, before I got here, you think about the anger and divisiveness of the city. You had the mayor fighting with the council, you had the mayor fighting with the unions, you had people in Detroit fighting with Lansing. Every time a business tried to come, everybody just viciously attacked the business. It was just a terrible climate where nobody wanted to move here. Of course, everybody's moving out. Nobody wanted to invest here. And I give Council President Brenda Jones enormous credit. She often votes against my recommendation, but she has run city council in a professional and civil way where she hasn't tolerated the kind of bad behavior that we have seen before. And that's been a huge part of Detroit's recovery, has been that tone of civility, and it has been the relationships that we have built up. And I just don't get it. This whole Lansing thing, the nastiness, the anger. But I was with the governor yesterday, and I told her, as you know, 7 years as mayor, I drive myself. I don't have security with me. I drive in neighborhoods. They're with me when I go to an event. But I've never at any point felt unsafe in the city. In the last week, based on what we're getting off of these kind of outstate people angry at these local orders, we're starting to have to evaluate that. I thought, this is a crazy situation when the risk to public officials are people who have whipped themselves into a frenzy over things that we can sit down and talk about.
Let's talk for a moment about businesses. Detroit was on a pretty amazing uptick in terms of new businesses, small businesses opening up, minority-owned businesses, not just up and down Woodward, but in neighborhoods, Avenue of Fashion, Livernois, everywhere you went. It was a pleasure to drive to do stories in the city of Detroit because you saw all of these burgeoning businesses. COVID-19 has struck businesses across the region very hard. But I just read an article today talking about how small cafes and diners are those that are going to be hit the hardest when it comes to trying to survive. What's being done to help these businesses out?
We've done a lot of things, and Kevin Johnson and the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation have been just great in a whole series of things with a lot of support from the private sector. We've done grants, we've done loans, hundreds of businesses have gotten money to keep them going. And now that they've reopened, I'm being told by a number of businesses on Livernois that they're doing better business now than they have in years with what we've invested. They are operating safely. They've got the proper kind of distancing. But we're going to need another round of help because it took a lot of work to get those storefronts occupied. And we need to make darn sure that we get a vaccine here in March or April. We don't have a bunch of empty storefronts again. And so we're going to continue the loan and grant programs. And I just encourage Detroiters, go out and support your neighborhood businesses. In every case I've been to, they are practicing safe social distancing.
These businesses are able to stay afloat, and do you think they'll be able to through, as you talked about, the precarious flu meets COVID months?
It's going to be interesting. And of course, for restaurants, it's not easy to make money in the best of times. And so not every restaurant is going to survive. A number have gone to very efficient carryout services. And of course, in the city, we changed a bunch of parking meters to unmetered 15-minute stops to pick up food so that the restaurants could convert over to that type of carryout businesses. Those that have done it well are doing okay. 50% capacity is not great, which is what they have to operate on now. And it's going to be a little more challenging for those that have been putting seating outside. But we're just going to have to keep supporting them for really another 4 or 5 months. And I want to have a shout out to Warren Evans. I mean, what Warren Evans has done with the assistance to businesses has also been a huge effect. And so working together, we kept a lot of folks going. And I think if we come out the other side, next summer is going to be a great year for business owners in Detroit.
A year ago, if we said that we'd be talking to the mayor of Detroit for 20 of the 40 minutes of this forum and simply focus on a pandemic, we'd say we were talking in a dream world. But sadly, that's where we're at. But there is other news to report and other things to talk about, including some good news when it comes to Fiat Chrysler and the plant. The commitment there was to employ Detroiters and make sure the Detroiters had work. Give us an update. How's that going?
It's unbelievable how well it has worked. You've got now more than 2,000 Detroiters have already accepted jobs. The first 2,000 jobs have all gone to Detroiters. They aren't even opening until February or March of next year. And I wouldn't be surprised if all 4,000 or 5,000 of their opening jobs go to Detroiters. And so what Nicole Sherrard-Freeman has done at Detroit at Work is unbelievable. Detroit at Work and the 8 centers they have now been the hiring halls for pretty much everybody in Detroit. And so what we did was hold these job fairs and tell people, these are hard jobs. You're on your feet all day. You're going to have to pass a math and reasoning test. You got to have a high school degree. We list all these qualifications, and then we offered weekend tutoring for those who wanted to get their math skills up before they had to go to FCA and take the test. And our churches were full on Saturdays of Detroiters getting their tutoring so they could pass. And FCA is thrilled at the qualifications of the Detroiters coming through. So we've got a couple thousand have already accepted. And Roop, here's something we never saw coming. In Warren and Sterling Heights, FCA is operating plants, and you had some older plant workers eligible for retirement. When COVID hit, they said, I'm just retiring, I'm out of here. Created several hundred vacancies. And so FCA started taking the Detroiters and said, even before the new plant opens next year, they've started placing them in their existing plants. And when that happened, we now have a whole line of Detroit companies who have come to Detroit at Work. New Center Stamping, Universal Assembly, Dakota, and a number of others who have come in and said, we want the same agreement, that if we'll give you our qualifications, if you'll go recruit the Detroiters, we will interview everybody from your Detroit list before we interview anybody from any place else. And it's causing us to land more and more companies, not by threatening them or being mean to them, but by saying we can fill your jobs faster here in the city of Detroit than you can anyplace else in the country.
I had the chance to visit that carpentry apprentice school when it was in Ferndale, of course, building now a huge facility in the city of Detroit. I want to focus on that for a moment. When you think a little bit about the traditional 4-year college route and what we encourage young people as the society to do, we should keep in mind that there are far more talented people who work with their hands and their heads in a way to make things. And that's what we do in this city. And that we should encourage them to take part in those opportunities. Give us an idea of that carpentry school, that apprenticeship school, what people can expect.
Well, you can drive down 96 in Livernois right now and you can see it. It's going up. The steel frame is up. $30 million carpentry school in Detroit. And Tom Lutz and the carpenters deserve enormous credit. But here's the issue. African Americans have been excluded from the building trades for generations. Members of this community just have not been reflected in a number of the trades, particularly the carpenters, the plumbers, the laborers, the electrical workers, have said, this is morally wrong, we're going to change it. And they're really working hard to get Detroiters into their apprenticeship program. The carpenters went a step further. And they said, we're going to show the people of this city that there are good paying jobs and we want you. And they're building a $30 million training center. They're going to train 1,500 carpenters a year at 96 in Livernois starting next year. And so these are really good paying jobs that can be, a really good life. And I'm really glad to see the trades starting to do this. And the point that I keep making to them, and I've got a number of executive orders that strongly encourages this, but for 30, 40 years, the construction in this region was by and large in the suburbs. Right now, and for the next 10 years, the lion's share of construction is going on in the city of Detroit. And
I can't forget it, Mr. Mayor. I had the chance to talk to a gentleman who's from the city of Detroit, was taking classes at the location in Ferndale at that carpentry school, and he said that he actually helped build Little Caesars Arena. And he drives with his son, and every time, like every dad always does, repeating the same story over and over again, says, son, I helped build that. But the pride that he had in his eyes when he said that was something that I will never forget, having interviewed him not long ago.
And so you're going to have pride in the workers who are building the high rise coming out of the Hudson site, who are building the Fiat Chrysler plant, who are restoring the Michigan Central Railroad for Ford, for all kinds of apartment buildings being built around the city, and very shortly for a $400 million Amazon facility at the state fairgrounds. And so we've seen the poverty rate in this city drop dramatically, 42% 4 years ago down to 30% now. We just had a huge drop in poverty. And it's because we are bringing jobs back into the city that are good paying middle class jobs that Detroiters can get. They're not being built out in Rochester or Livingston. They're being built right here in the city. And so imagine this, you've got Detroit workers building the buildings where Detroiters will work for the coming generations. It's a very exciting time.
When you take a look at the change in culture because of COVID-19, you're friends with Dan Gilbert and the good men and women over at Bedrock. Does it concern you about the culture that's changed? People are working from home. I'm coming to you from my basement. I'm anchoring the news from here. Hopefully I'll get back soon. In the meantime, are you concerned about those empty buildings all through the city of Detroit?
So I am right now, because in the short term, it's certainly hurting the small business people downtown who depended on that daytime traffic from the office. Longer term, we'll see. I think you may not have as many people per square feet. The trend had been to all these cubicles and close in kind of seating in office buildings. I think that may change some. But here's what I'm hearing from everybody in the business side, and we're seeing in the city of Detroit. Of course, I've been going to work every day since March. We got very strict protocols here with temperature checks and regular testing and masks in the office. And the like. But here's what people are saying to me now after 6 months. For the 5, 10, 15-year employee, they can work from home and they do just fine. But when you bring a new employee into the organization, to train them, to have them be part of the culture, to meet people, the new employees are doing poorly. And the companies I'm talking to are saying, if we're going to keep the culture of our organization, we got to be physically present. We've got to be able to bring in new folks, train them, and have them be a part of it. So I think business is going to return to some version of the traditional office next year, but we'll see.
Great to have, of course, all of these good men and women who can work with their hands or work in these office buildings. They need a place to live. Affordable housing. This has been something that's been a charge of yours since the beginning of your administration, a $48 million initiative to make sure that people have affordable housing. Unwrap that for us for a moment.
Well, I've studied closely what happened in Brooklyn, what happened in Washington, D.C., what happened in Seattle, what's happening now in Austin, Texas, where businesses came to a city Broadian workers who came in and took over the housing and forced out those who had lived there for a long time. I got elected mayor of Detroit by the people who stayed. And they elected me because they believed I would watch out for the people who stayed. And so I want to make sure for all the jobs that we're bringing back, that there is housing that we can afford. And so the year before I got elected, we had a case on Washington Boulevard, a senior apartment building that I visited a number of times, low-income housing. Somebody bought it, kicked out the low-income seniors who had been there for many years, and made it an upscale market rate building. And city council gave them a tax break to kick out the low-income seniors. I was just appalled. And so I'm really proud to say in the last 7 years, every single affordable housing property that's come up, we've gone in and renegotiated 20 and 30-year extensions. It has not happened in the last 7 years because of Arthur Jemison and Donald Rencher and the great team that has done that. So that was a big piece. And then second, we passed an ordinance, and Councilmember Mary Sheffield deserves credit in her sponsorship of this, that if you're building new apartments in Detroit with our assistance, 20% of those units have to be set aside permanently for affordable housing. And this is what I used to say when I was at DMC. The same neighborhood where the doctors and nurses live, the people who work in the cafeteria and push the wheelchair should be able to live. Doesn't mean you're in the same size unit, but you should be in the same neighborhood. And that's what a city is. If you want to live in an area that's stratified completely by income, there are plenty of suburbs to go live in. But if you're going to be in Detroit, you're going to be choosing a lifestyle that says people of all backgrounds and all incomes are all living together and interacting with each other. And so we've had great success so far, but we have a lot more work to go.
When you take a look at the future when it comes to conventions, I know this city, under the charge of the Visitors Bureau here, has done tremendous work to really attract larger meetings in town. It's on hold all across the country. Detroit's no exception. Is there some kind of an effort being made right now to make sure these hotels stay afloat and that the convention center, of course, continues to do business as we book into next year?
Yeah, that's a real issue. I think the Convention Bureau has done a fine job. I think the decision to move the auto show to September was exactly the right thing to do. I think it was very astute the way they did that. We did not need to be overloaded in June with all of the other great activities going on in the city. So now that gets spread out. So the hotels are going to have a tough time for another 4 or 5 months. It's really going to take a vaccine. There really isn't. I mean, I wish I had a better answer, but that's just the truth. And it's going to be the same for the conventions. But I'm really expecting by the spring of next year that there will be a vaccine in this country, that people will start to feel safe, and by next summer we'll be back to normal.
One of the papers in our town the other day reported upon the fact that they're seeing a surge in the number of absentee ballots coming in from the city of Detroit. People were concerned that perhaps, the African-American voters in these large cities wouldn't be empowered or intrigued enough to go out and vote. That doesn't seem to be the case in Detroit. There seems to be a lot of interest. Talk about election time here now.
It's been unbelievable. So in the August primary 4 years ago, 65,000 people voted in Detroit. In the August primary this year, 130,000 voted. Double the vote, and there was nothing different on the ballot. The level of interest here is extremely high, and the fact that the Michigan Constitution was changed to allow mail-in voting is encouraging greater participation. And we're seeing the same thing now. We just had to send another 150 or so employees to the clerk's office just to get out the mail, to mail the absentee ballots out to all the folks who have requested it. But I think Janice Winfrey's doing a fine job. We've opened now 23 satellite locations at rec centers and schools and educational institutions around the city. I went and voted last week. Took me 15 minutes, but now you can walk in very much like a regular polling place 7 days a week at these 23 sites. That's something Detroiters haven't seen before, and it's catching on more and more every day. But Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, tells me it's not just Detroit. You're seeing this kind of surge in interest around the state. But I think the people of this city want to see a change in direction in the United States, and I'm very confident you're going to see a very huge turnout this year.
Regardless of who people decide to cast their ballots for, the integrity of the election is critical right now. There's been some doubt cast on that and on partisan lines. As we take a look at that, what's being done right now to make sure, just as a leader of Detroit, to tell people, look, your vote's going to count. Your vote will, of course, be honored.
Well, the Secretary of State is working very closely with the clerk. And so the training that's going on, I feel very good about. The Michigan legislature passed an excellent bill about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I give Senator Mike Shirkey and Speaker Lee Chatfield enormous credit for doing this. And Roop, the issue is this. The law says that you can't open mail-in ballots till Election Day. And that's never really been a big issue. But when you're opening 200,000 instead of 50,000, you could have your results delayed by days. And you've seen that happen in other states in the country where they had the same thing. And what the legislature passed was something that allowed the clerk to start opening the ballots Monday morning before Election Day to process them, not to start counting, but to process them. That basically they get a 10-hour head start. And because of that, and because of the cooperation between the Secretary of State and the Detroit City Clerk, I don't have any questions about the integrity of the election process. I think we're going to do just fine.
We continue to talk to Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, about this topic, but good to at least touch on it with you. Something that you have your hands in a lot deeper right now is as you mentioned before, this opportunity with Amazon. Give people an idea who haven't been following the headlines as closely, of course, as you, as to what we can expect with Amazon.
Well, when I started, it had been years since a major employer had come to the city of Detroit. It would have been 20 years, something like that. And we landed a major auto supplier, Flexingate, that builds the bodies for the Ford Broncos. And when we landed them, we gave them a huge break on the cost of the land. We gave them huge tax breaks. And they brought 500 jobs in the city of Detroit. And then when we went after Fiat Chrysler and Ford, we gave them huge tax breaks because nobody was interested in coming to Detroit given our reputation of being very anti-business. And it's just been terrible. It drove jobs out of the city and caused Detroiters to be unemployed and really have the highest poverty rate in the country. And I had this hope that one day we were going to be so successful, we were going to land a major national employer without any tax breaks. And so when Amazon came in and said, we want to build the largest distribution center in Michigan, the other ones that they build in Shelby and Romulus and Livonia are 1 million square feet. This is going to be 4 million square feet, $400 million investment. And we got the fairgrounds been overgrown with weeds since the governor closed it 11 years ago. And they wanted to be on that site. And I said, we'll do that, but here's the thing, there's going to be no tax breaks. You're going to pay full price for the property. You're going to have to build us a transit center in addition to paying full price so that our riders can switch buses from Woodward to 8 Mile in a safe, a warm environment. And it's going to be full taxes for all the time you're there. And I was very surprised when Amazon said, okay, we'll do it. Detroit was so attractive that we could get this kind of investment without any tax breaks. And we haven't seen that in at least 50 years. You can go back to the old Poletown plants and the old Chrysler Jefferson plants in the 1980s. Those took major tax breaks. We're bringing in 1,200 jobs, good paying jobs that can move 1,200 families from poverty to the middle class without a tax break. I'm really proud of it, and I'm really hopeful it'll get through pretty quickly.
All of this success critically important, but it does hinge in part on the crime rate in the city of Detroit. That's the case in every major American city. Talk for a moment about your concerns moving forward, and of course the faith that you put into the police chief, James Craig.
Well, I think we have one of the finest police chiefs in America, and the crime rate has been steadily heading down for the last 6 years. We had 380 murders a year before I got elected. Last year was about 260. It's one of the great reductions in the country. This year, we've seen it all over America. shootings and homicides up in every major city, and we've been no different. How much of that is the culture of what's going on in the city, and how much is that we have had to commit huge resources of the Detroit Police Department to make sure the protests didn't turn into the kind of fires and lootings that you saw in nearly every other city. It sucked a lot of resources out of the everyday management of the crime in the city, and I'm hopeful that we'll get back, because this is a great police department, and I'd love them to be back full-time fighting crime. And the other thing we're doing is we're running major programs again through Detroit at Work with young men and women who have been engaged in gangs, and we're hiring them in jobs and placing them in jobs to say, look, if you're making the decision you're making because you need to support people you love, let's give you a positive career track. Nobody, retires to Florida after a life of crime. Let's really get a positive career track. And we're seeing a lot of community groups coming forward now and really helping to reach out to people who maybe have been on the wrong side of the law. And so we got a long way to go, but I have full confidence in the police department.
Well, we have, of course, seen a stark contrast in how Detroit handled these civil unrest protests. We also know there's an underlying issue there. And the reason you had thousands of people on the streets night after night was because they believe there's an institutional issue. When you take a look at the message that the reverends, the protesters, and everybody who peacefully did this had to say, as the leader of the city of Detroit, what do you want to tell them about better days that lie ahead?
Well, let me start with this. Our protesters have largely been outside the city of Detroit, and they've had agendas that have had nothing to do with the pain that this community felt. And you think about the pain the people of the city went through, from losing a whole lot of people close to them in COVID in March and April, to watching the murder of George Floyd and all the incidents that African Americans have faced with police officers over a course of a lifetime. And then it's compounded when you've got the case in Louisville where they say there's no charges on a person who was an EMS, a first responder. It's been a very painful period, but I'm hoping it brings real change, because I think there is a far more understanding in this country about the systemic racism. It's real, it exists. You can't just talk about it, you got to push back on it every single day. And I know Chief Craig, who himself, as a young black police officer in the 1970s, was put in a car with a white partner who told him not to talk and not to touch the radio. So you have now the police chief of the city who knows firsthand what institutional racism there is in law enforcement, and has really committed his life to trying to fix it.
We only have about 3 minutes left, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about something that's very near and dear to your heart. You got into this business of governing the city of Detroit and said, look, I'm going to take out these blighted homes. Now there's a proposal that is going to be on the ballot, and you want people to know about that proposal. Why do you think this is going to work better than anything else that we've had so far?
Well, what we've had has worked. We have, in the last 6 years, demolished 21,000 houses and taken another 8,000 vacant houses, gotten them sold and renovated, and moved families. That's 30,000 houses that were vacant 6 years ago that are no longer vacant in the city. The entire city of Southfield, where your studio is, I know you may not be there right now, but where your studio is, the city of Southfield has 30,000 homes. Imagine if you said every single house in Southfield is vacant, and in 6 years you either have to fix them up or knock them down. It would seem like an impossible task. We did that. We got 30,000 solved. We got 20,000 to go. And the 30,000 that we've addressed were addressed because I went to Washington repeatedly with President Obama, with Senator Debbie Stabenow, and got the funding. But now that funding has been spent on the first 30,000. And so we're going to do this ourselves. And it's a choice that the people of the city are going to have to make, which is, Are you satisfied with the way your neighborhoods are now? Or do we go ahead and finish the job? And if Proposal N passes, we can sell $250 million worth of bonds. Our credit rating's been upgraded 7 times. We've got capacity. We can do this without raising anybody's taxes because we have managed our finances well. But in the next 3 or 4 years, we can renovate another 8,000 houses. We can demolish 8,000. So we balance saving the ones that can be saved, taking down the ones that can't be saved. And because we're using city funds, we can use a city ordinance giving preference to Detroit contractors and Detroiters. And so the people of this city are going to make a decision. And I work for the people of the city. So if the voters decide, yes, finish the job, we're going to do this through a new Department of Demolition under the city of Detroit. And we're going to finish the job. And if the voters say no, I think we're okay where we are, respect that decision. But from the community conversations I'm having, there's enormous support for Proposal N.
And the transparency by which you folks want to move forward to avoid any issues that we've seen in the past, that's something that you want to be very clear on as well.
Well, the land bank never should have been involved in demolition. But the federal law Congress passed said demolition money could not come to city government. You had to do it through a separate authority. The land bank had 4 people working for them. They weren't ready to do $265 million in a procurement program. Never should have happened. But that's behind us. What we have now is the Department of Demolition in the city of Detroit, run by the city's procurement department, overseen by city council. We've got no problems with the city demolitions. And so I think city council's feeling confident, and certainly we're feeling confident that this is the right approach.
When Detroit does well, Michigan does well. We all know that. As cliche as that sounds, we all understand that. So whether you bleed red or blue, we understand that the success of the city of Detroit and your success, Mr. Mayor, is incumbent on the whole region's success. So we thank you for joining us today and spending the time with us.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you. This has been the Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 Conversations. We thank you so much for joining us, of course. We thank DTE for their wonderful contribution to make this conversation possible. Have a great day, everybody.
The Detroit Regional Chamber's MPC20 Conversations Respond and Rebuild digital series is provided in partnership with Detroit Public Television and presented by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, with additional support from Accenture, Bank of America, Barton Mallow, Comerica Bank, Consumers Energy, Delta Dental, Dow, DTE Energy, Enbridge Energy, Ford Motor Company, Huntington Bank, ITC, KPMG, the Kresge Foundation, Kroger, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, PNC Bank, Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, the Skillman Foundation, and TCF Bank. And by these supporters. Support for Detroit Public TV's coverage is provided by DTE Energy Foundation and Masco.